Hello, my name is Peter Cinnamon and you're very welcome to this. It's a podcast and it's all about the Irish League, where the destination of the Gibson Cup has been settled for this season at least. It's returning back to Windsor Park. After events between the Glens and Larne midweek meant that neither could catch the Blues in the table. We ask how the South Belfast side will look to build upon this success and where it ranks amongst its recent triumphs. Elsewhere, the top 6 race is settled. The championship enters its own final stretch as the battle for promotion continues, and we look ahead to the Irish Cup semi-finals this weekend on your latest weekly edition of Kicking Match. I have reassembled my podcast studio here after I decanted it all and brought it down to Pug Uglies for Kicking Match Live on Friday evening. What a night it was. I want to say a massive thank you to everybody who came down and supported the show. I mean, that was something that I really wasn't sure if I should do or put together, and I'm so glad I did, and it simply wouldn't have been a thing without your support. I also need to give a huge shout out to the likes of Barry Flynn for coming down, talking about his book. I mean, I had people there who were there supporting me that have really no interest in Irish League football, and they were quite simply transfixed by the things that Barry had to say. You know the score. You've heard him talk about his stories and his books before, and he was simply brilliant on Friday night. I also want to give a shout out to the fellows that you know very well. I have to say to Ross Welsh and Joe McCallion, I know you know who they are from around the grounds, and they have been a part of that show from the very genesis of it, from the idea of it, the little germ that I had talking through it with them. If they weren't so supportive and said yes, they wanted to be a part of that project from the beginning, I don't genuinely believe I would have had the bravery to go out and do it. I was able to bounce everything off them. They are as much a part of that show as anybody, and I am so thankful to being able to share the stage with them on Friday, but all the things that led up to it, they were amazing, and they did a cracking job on the night. And you've probably seen it already. Stuart King, what a guy. I mean, so many people, he was a special guest, so many people came up to me after the show and were like, I can't believe that's what Stuart King is really like, because we're so used to him on the pitch being that competitor, being that absolute terrier on the sidelines as a manager, just wanting to win every ball from the sideline. And he was so thoughtful. His analysis was brilliant. I think we've all really enjoyed his contributions to the media recently, and he just showed what a thoughtful mind he is to all the discussions and the crack. I'm very thankful for the time he gave up, and you never know, maybe I'll get him on some sort of Kick and Match platform sometime down the line. Will I do another one is the question I've been asked. Maybe. If he was to do another one, lots of things to think about. I mean, any feedback, I'm super open to it. If you were there or not, kickamatch@gmail.com, and we'll see what we can do. But for all intents and purposes, a massively successful night. Thank you for helping me getting that across the line. But let's look ahead now to what's going on going forward, and a fun weekend of football ahead, a nice one of football that happened just previously there, and we're going to chat about it all in the company of football journalist Lewis Bennett. Hello.
How's things, Peter? All right?
I'm good. I've been able to sleep over the weekend, which was nice. A lot of prep went into that Friday night for Kick and Match Live, but back to Porridge we go. It's another weekend of Irish League football, only a few left, and there wasn't as many twists and turns. There was some in the championship across the past 7 days, which we'll get into, but the main thing which has went down since the last time I stepped in front of this microphone and recorded it for all those podcast players is that we have it confirmed. You can get your, whatever the name for the official title for the engraver, or is there like maybe not a fancy name for a trophy engraver, you can stick it down for 2024, 2025. It is once again going back to Windsor Park, something that we all realistically saw coming, let's say, weeks ago.
It was only a matter of time, wasn't it? You know, every week that was passing, it was becoming more and more of a foregone conclusion, and ultimately Linfield have won it before the split. I think full credit to them. You look at this season, and a lot's been made of it being competitive, much more bunched up. The probably the so-called traditional order of the past number of years being broken up by the likes of Dungannon, obviously finishing in the top half with a split, and Portadown coming over ever so close. So credit to Linfield, because a lot of teams have dropped points and it has been more bunched up. They've built a consistent run while others around them have dropped points. They've won it in emphatic style. 2 years is a drought by Linfield standards. And let's be honest, it's not really the way they wanted to confirm the league title. You want to do it on your own pitch. But however they did it, I think it was important that they won the league this season. And as I say, full credit to them, because I think they've been absolutely by far and away the best team in the league this season.
This was clearly the aim going into this season for Linfield. 2 years of disappointment. There was a feeling amongst maybe just Linfield fans, but fans across the board in the league, that this could be the start of years and years of dominance from Larne, in the same way that we saw from Linfield in many other decades, like the 2000s, and Linfield be able to claw back. What will we see next season with Larne trying to refigure themselves again? They will unlikely to have the same distractions as European football. In fact, based on just stats and coefficient, Linfield should be in a good position to repeat the same feat that Larne did. How will they deal with European football if they can get through to the same phase that Larne did? But let's not talk about other people here. Let's talk about Linfield, and no doubt we'll spend a lot of time chatting about them as the weeks go on between now and the end of the season. We are here before the game against Dungannon, which will only really have an impact on Dungannon's placing within the top six long term. It's been a season where they haven't been thrilling. They haven't been particularly dominant in games, but you've got to give it to someone who is destined to be the player of the year. Joel Cooper has helped them, turned so many of those games that could have been a draw or a loss, turn it around and give them a spark, give them the important goals. He was spotted at Coleraine over the weekend. Of course, it must be one of the most touted transfers and absolutely yonks in the Irish League. But there's also parts of this team going forward. You can see they're building for the future. Morrison offered. They knew they were in a really good position to win the league in January, but they've already taken steps for not only next season, but that European run, which is now going to be in their future.
Yeah, well, let's start with Joel Cooper. Certainly been an eventful season for him personally. At the end of it, I think if he doesn't win Player of the Year, there's going to be serious questions asked. He's always been a difference maker, and to be fair, he's produced the moments of magic when Linfield have needed them. And it was a bold decision, obviously. News of the Coleraine pre-contract agreement coming out in January. We saw it with Lee Baez and we saw it with Ronan Doherty, that Coleraine ultimately ended up paying up front. But David Healy kind of put this £1 million demand on David or on Joel Cooper, sorry. And he's been rewarded, you have to say, because Joel Cooper's got his head down and he's produced the goods on the pitch. It's been by no means a one-man team. Matthew Fitzpatrick, I think he's been maligned at times, but for me, Linfield are a much better team with him on the pitch. He's a big focal point for them. He's somebody a proper centre forward that you base your attack around. Even last season, I thought he contributes far more than just goals. It's no coincidence to me that some of Linfield's worst performances this season have came with him out of the team or suspended or whatever it may be.
He's come out of the past few weeks smelling of roses, because they've had to spend a few games without him. And Linfield fans can see, yes, here's Offord, yes, here's Morrison, and Cooper will likely be soon gone. But his influence at the top of the team was sorely missed. They're not going to be the team, at least in their current incarnation, that are going to blow teams away in the same way that they may have with the previous glory days of Peter Thompson and Ferguson and others. But with him, they have someone that does, maybe it's unfair to call it the dirty work, but football has become a more system-based game, and the traits that he has at an Irish League level is very important to keep Linfield up at the top end of the pitch and keeping the pressure on their opposition.
Definitely, and they've got stability up top and they've got options. And to be fair, Kieran Offord's goal against Larne is probably one of those points that you think that was probably the day that Linfield fans could really put sort of any semblance of a Larne charge with their games in hand to bed. You have to say he has made an impact, but I do see Fitzpatrick as an absolutely key player for them. And he did have a run, around that time when he was scoring goals, probably his best goal scoring run since his latter days at Glenavon. If you give a full pre-season to Callum Morrison and Kieran Offord to slot in with that, then Linfield could end up filling that Joel Cooper void fairly seamlessly.
How will we look back on this achievement? Because winning before the split is very, very impressive on paper. And looking at the points table at the minute, 73 points, 19 points ahead of Larne, and that could be increased by the time people are listening to this before the last final games. Even when Larne were doing well, they weren't able to achieve this. And I think one thing that hasn't been talked about enough in the past few years is that while Linfield weren't winning the title, they were getting massive points totals that would have been close in previous years. This year, because they haven't had the real neck and neck fight that they may have had in previous terms, perhaps they have let their foot off the gas here or there. And when it's all said and done, of course, they may be sitting on 95 points come the end, maybe even more. That probably seems unlikely. That kind of total will go, wow, what a season. But for Linfield fans, there will be a couple of things that will feel like little scratches on the glass looking back on this. It's the defeats to Glentorrans, even though they've had the last laugh overall, and mixed in all of that with it being only one trophy. They will look back and think there was plenty of other occasions where they could have lifted either League Cup, Irish Cup, Continental Shield, but they didn't. And Glentoran have also been the team that has been the fly in the ointment on those occasions as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. To be fair, last season I thought David Healy got a lot of unfair flack because I thought Linfield did impressively well to keep as close to Larne as they did with so many injuries. And Larne had a fully fit squad and probably a deeper squad in their own right. I think the priority for Linfield was always winning the league. You can talk about winning the League Cup and second place finishes and this and that, but at Linfield, it's simple as the demand is to win. And the priority this season simply had to be getting back on the top spot. And Linfield have went and done that.
You're so right. Like if you were offering deals to fans, they would have said, we will take the Gibson Cup coming back, even if it means nothing else. They would have 100% taken that.
Yeah,
deal.
I completely agree. I just think that had to be the priority, restoring that place on top spot. And ultimately, it's Champions League football next season, playing in the qualifying rounds. As we've seen with Larne, it improves their chances of reaching another European group stage, league phase as we call them now. I think that's important, getting back into the top table of European football. And if they have sort of the same luck as Larne did, perhaps in the draw last year with a second round bye, it might be sooner rather than later before we're talking about another Irish League team reaching a European League phase. So Champions League football, I think, is important, and the financial rewards that they can get out of that. Linfield, I think, have shown a lot of the doggedness this season that we saw in some of their previous title wins, grinding out points and getting those 1-0, 2-0 wins, comeback wins. We've seen those again this season, and it does feel like a quintessential Linfield title win, if you could call it that, something that we've become used to with David Healy and his title winning campaigns. So they're, I think, in a strong position to go forward, even with Joel Cooper and Stephen Fallon leaving. And I think this really has to be a platform to push on, because when David Healy was under interest from Wraith Rovers and Roy McGivern stood his ground and got him tied down to a new contract, I think it was then that it was really Linfield had to go for it, and only the title would do. They've went and done that, and now they'll go into the summer and plan ahead. I'm sure they have a recruitment strategy drafted out. I think just looking back, it had to be win the league, and ultimately they've went and done that.
You spoke about how it wasn't won on the pitch, as some people have said. What you're referring to there is that because there was results elsewhere when they weren't playing, that confirmed it. Some fans felt as though they didn't have that big roar at the end of 90 minutes to say we are now champions. They will have a procession between now and the end of April, which begins at Stagmore Park. The result that led to that being locked in and confirmed was the game between Glentoran and Larne at the Oval, where Glentoran took an early 2-0 lead. Well, in the sense that it was 1-0 up at half time. It's then doubled just after the break. But Larne fought back and got to make it a draw, which made it all but locked in for Linfield. In that game there, it does end up that Larne and Glentoran were the teams that were closest. There's no guarantee that either of those teams will finish second, and that's probably what the true battle will be over the next few weeks in the split, which we'll spend time over the next week or so talking about. But for both those sides, I don't think anybody suggested Glentoran was going to be title contenders, and between the wins that they had over Linfield and the good run that they had in midwinter there was a feeling that maybe Glentoran could be good for next season. That doesn't look so great based on results recently. No doubt they will add bodies to it. Larne, their season's been on a slippy slope from pretty much at the moment that final whistle blew at Inver Park and they were locked into European group stage football, because that's when the results slipped, and their European adventure was always going to be avoiding being the whipping boys, but unfortunately they did finish last in that mega group stage that it was. Glentoran then followed that up with a result which did have an impact going into Saturday, because going into Saturday it was between Crusaders, Coleraine and Portadown on who would finish in the top two places. Well, the last two places in the top six. It was simple for the Crues, win and they were in, and they did it. Glentoran missing some key chances in the first half, but for Crusaders, they were in this weird position where if they lost, they were opening the door for a draw in the other game between Coleraine and Portadown. But getting that goal, holding on to it, they didn't need results to go the right way elsewhere, and this has been a really great run since the year turned 2025 for Crusaders. I'm sure advocates of Declan Goodell will say it just needed to get his feet under the table there, but give it up to Crues. They did what they needed to do and are sitting very proudly only 4 points off second.
It's a season of transition for Crusaders, and it's always going to be when a manager that's been at the club for nearly 20 years walks away. He's built an entire culture, a very consistent playing squad. Declan Goodell, who's obviously been involved in the academy setup, but is inexperienced as a manager in the Irish League. I think a top half finish would have been a good season for them, combined with a cup run. And I think finishing in the top half is a good return for them. They're guaranteed a place in the European playoff. And Declan Goodell, he wasn't qualified last season to take charge of those games, but he is now. He's enrolled on a UEFA Pro license course. So I think if Crusaders qualify for
I've heard that's quite important.
Yeah, definitely.
As we all discovered this year.
Yeah. If they qualify for Europe, I think it's a successful season for Crusaders. I think it's highly impressive. And there have been changes that they've had to make. It was the oldest squad in the Irish League that when Stephen Baxter left, it was a squad that was probably in need of refreshing in certain areas. And to be fair, Declan Goodell's made a few changes. The style of football is slightly different. A couple of younger players coming in who've caught the eye, the likes of Harry Franklin. I've been impressed by him all season. Kieran Offord, during the first half of the season, him coming on loan, Harry Jewett-White, players like them who've come in the summer and have done a pretty good job. And then to touch on sort of that winner-takes-all game between Coleraine and Portadown, disappointing for Portadown, obviously not to make the top half, but all things considered, a very, very good season for them, comfortably avoiding relegation. I think the target for them, ever since they were relegated a couple of years ago, was coming back into the league and consolidating themselves again. And I think they've made the first step towards doing that by obviously, winning the championship last year, and then they'll still have their sights on trying to get a place in the European playoff themselves now by finishing top half of the bottom half, top of the bottom half, so to speak. So I think it's been a good season for them, and they can make it even better in these final five. And for Coleraine, with this transition to full-time football, again, top half finish was important. They've been on a good run of form recently where there were maybe a few questions asked of Dean Shields. Again, same as Crusaders, they're in transition, and to secure a place in the European playoff would be, and to qualify for Europe would be probably their first priority at this stage.
I think Crusaders getting into the top six is mightily, if I can steal a phrase from a certain man, mightily impressive, because it didn't look that way that it was going to come down in January. You have to go back to a real key result in mid-January, and that was that loss to Dungannon Swifts 5-1 at home, demolished by a team that looked to almost certain be stealing their lunch in the top six. And Dungannon did seal their place at the top six, but it wasn't at the expense of the Crues. Since that game, they went on to win 6 of the last 9 games. Their only losses were against Linfield in the league, and this is league games here, and a draw against Loughgall, which realistically should not have happened. In fact, if they were able to get all 3 points in that game against Loughgall only a week or so ago, they would be, and they are up there fighting for second, which is unbelievable, but they'd be in an even better position, only 2 points off the teams that currently sit up there. So what a job. And remember, all of this is without Offord. So I still look at them and I think when I've seen them play, they lack a bit of attacking fluidity. Who doesn't? If I can go through the list of some teams, but they've been able to stay strong, avoid the kind of games where they were left open than that Dungannon 5-1, and sometimes teams need that wake up moment, and they've reacted incredibly well. They do finish in a quirk in the top six with a minus goal difference. So the next team down that even does have a minus goal difference is Ballymena in ninth. So congratulations to the Crues. For Glentoran, I really don't know what to say. They looked like 4 games ago they were sitting there with 51 points in the league. Other teams had to come and fight them, and if they just held on, got a few results here or there, they could have cruised into second and guaranteed European football. They've been dethroned from second, and now they've got it all to do, where it's very likely, unless Dungannon are the team that finish second and win the Irish Cup, or third is going to be in the lottery of the European playoffs. Last 4 games, 3 draws, then losing against the Crues. A mix of things there. I think they've had their own attacking problems. You add in the cup loss as well. There's been so many positives for Glentoran and Declan Devine, so let's not talk about complete disaster here again in the wide spectrum, the long-term vision of what Glentoran were hoping to achieve in the league this year. Third at the split, only not in second due to goal difference of 2, is still excellent, but they've missed that spark up top. And going into the summer, that's going to be something that they'll have to look at. I don't think it's just put in striker A and that changes everything. I think it comes from even deeper within the team. But, I mean, just look at the Saturday there with Joe Thompson. Both goals are pretty much from the edge of the box. And there's chances that just go begging with them scrambling, trying to poke it in, where they just needed someone to fire it through that collection of bodies, and it hopefully would have gone in or bounced off somebody. That'll be top of their list. For Glentoran, they still have time. Declan Devine kind of needs to rattle some cages and go, right, fellas, get back to this, because they gave away those 2 goals against Lauren. Those 2 extra points would be very important when it comes to this battle with Lauren, because they're not even with them.
Yeah, no, start of the season you would have said second or third in the league going at this stage of the season, and a cup win I think would have been a successful season for Glentoran, and it still can be. I think if they qualified automatically for Europe with that second spot, it's a great first season for Declan Devine. As you say, they've had their struggle for goals, particularly at home, which is this weird statistical anomaly. I think they're bottom of the league for home goals scored. Illustrates the problem, maybe there is a bit of a lack of quality. Maybe I do think the tools are there. The recruitment at the start of the season was good. Players that they brought in from across the water, the likes of Frankie Fed and Daniel Jolly, who's obviously made a big impact in goal, and Cody Lyons Foster showed up defensively. Joe Thompson's been a great mid-season arrival from Larne. He had that run sort of towards the start of last season when he had a real run of goal scoring games, and it made a difference for Larne come the end. And the early signs are that he's replicating that in his first few months at Glentoran. So he's made a big impact. Fuad Sulays, obviously, I think he's indispensable at the moment in midfield, really makes them tick. I think patience is required. They are in a bit of a sticky spot at the minute, but they went on a 16-game unbeaten run, prided a lot of the time on defensive solidity. Maybe a sense that cracks were emerging, but I don't think Glentoran fans really expected them to go in and win the league this season. So I think it really has to be viewed as part of a building block. If they end the season on a high, I think that'll restore a bit of confidence going into an important summer.
Talk about a team who's ending this season very, very well. Coleraine, only one loss in the past 10 games. We go back to their game in mid-January against Crusaders, which they lost. Since then, it's a draw against the Swifts, draw against Cliftonville, beat Carrick, do lose to Glentoran, but even then, from late February, what a tear. Beating Linfield, beating Portadown, Glenavon, draw with Larne, or probably will feel unlucky midweek to draw with Cliftonville after going ahead in that game twice, wasn't it? No, they pulled it back. They pulled it back late on to make it 2-1, and then still let them squeeze in with a penalty with only minutes to go. And then look, they finished the job against Portadown, against teams around them. People thought those fixtures were going to be too tough for them, but they've stood resolute. All those January signings coming to the fore. I'm sure some Coleraine fans will think it looks good, but we could be even better. These are small victories against Glenavon and Portadown. I think based on some of their play and Carrick Rangers, they could be doing with pushing on and putting these teams to bed. And they needed that late run to slip in to the top six, and they've done it. They've invested, and the chat is going to be even more investment come the summer. This is a team who needed those extra bodies and are now a really lethal force going in there, guaranteed to be in this European playoff, and no one will want to go up against them because they look very dangerous and continue to grow in their stride week on week.
Yeah, I suppose they kind of need that assurance of still being in with a shout for European football. I think that is important for Coleraine and their ambitions. Yeah, that late runs obviously helped them. New signings, particularly eye-catching, the likes of Charles Dunn and Declan McManus, who've built good careers for themselves across the water. McManus and his particularly eye-catching scoring record in the Welsh top flight.
I love Dunn. What a man mountain he is at the back.
Yeah, he's really made an impact, a real leader in there. And yeah, Charles Dunn's made a big impact, good pedigree and a leadership influence. And McManus, obviously, that free kick that he scored the other week against Glenavon, was a real show of his quality. And it's ultimately a game that's made a big difference. And that's what he was billed as. He was one of the most lethal strikers in the Welsh Premier Division over the past number of years, and he's come in and made an impact with Coleraine. It definitely alleviates a bit of pressure on Dean Shields, I think, because yes, the position was in jeopardy in the top six. They did need that late run. They needed a run of form, and they've ultimately got that reward because I think regardless of them being a team in transition, for the investment that they've got and the new structure and the full-time structure and all the turnover in the summer, a bottom half season would have been considered a really disappointing one for them. It takes pressure off him. It takes pressure off Oren Kearney, who's went upstairs, and his recruitment policy. So to be in the top half and guarantee their place in the European playoff, definitely important for Coleraine, and they really have to use this as a platform to push on if they want to realise their ambitions of ultimately challenging for the league, which they build as they wanted to be winning the league in their centenary season in 2027. So that and the players that they're bringing in the summer, Joel Cooper and who they've already brought in, Levi Ives and Ronan Doherty, we've touched on them with their Irish League experience. A strong end of the season and qualifying for Europe can really be a springboard to bigger and better things.
If there's a trend or something to say, this is the type of player that's so hot right now. Look what's improved Coleraine. McManus, 30. Dunn, 32. Ronan Doherty, 29. Levi Ives, only 27, but this is experience that's come into this side and made them so much more solid. There's lots of exciting talent throughout this team. I really like Reece Campbell at 25. We all know what he can do. Cameron Stewart at the back, 22. I really like Dylan Boyle in midfield, 23, but he just couldn't do it all by himself. And those extra players added on to the likes of Glacken, who's 30, and the Chevin's 26, but's been there, done that in this league and knows it inside and out based on what he's been done for the past decade. I mean, of RC football he's had. That's just helped them take over, and they now have, people talk about cup finals like that. That is kind of where they are. They are, what is it? 5 points off the current teams in second and third, so like they need results to go their way and go on a tear, but it's not completely out of the realms of possibility that they just keep on cooking. A word on Portadown, if I was to list there the Crues, are they in their past 11 games have won 6 of them for Portadown since the new year, which started off with a loss to their town counterparts Anna United in the cup. Only 3 wins, 5 losses and 4 draws. 2 of those losses being against Coleraine, where I thought it was going to be important, and it clearly was. That's 6 points that slingshotted them above the Ports by 3 points. And they had chances as well. You know, they only draw with Dungannon at home. They draw in a good game with Cliftonville. Look, there is good results against Larne and Carrick and Loughgall in there. But being second, similar to Glentoran, in a good position, you know, they're playing against teams around them. They need to get across the line. They haven't done that. But you talk about Portadown, there's these 2 camps within their fan base, and many of them will be I'm disappointed, we were second, we should have done more. And then there's like the perspective party who are saying, look, at least we're not in Carrick Rangers' position. And I'm sure there was fans who were wearing the red of Portadown that were obsessed with Loughgall and Glenavon results in August and September that haven't even checked their phone for those teams since October. So next season will show us for them what they hope to be. But there's no doubt, with 5 games to go, mission accomplished, and probably was accomplished in January pretty much, despite all those poor results for the Ports.
Yeah, I don't think you could call it a disappointing season for Portadown by any stretch. Disappointing that they've missed out on the top 6, but as you say, perspective, there's far worse places they could be, Peter.
Ask Newry.
Yeah, Newry, Loughgall, you know, second season syndrome, you know, hopefully it doesn't strike Portadown next season, but I think they'll be all right. I think the target for them, you know, that season that they had a couple of years ago, when really, bar the final quarter of that season, they were probably the worst team in Premiership history, going by their points total. I think the aim had to be in the Championship, that they had to build the blocks for them to rebuild themselves as a Premiership force. And the players that they signed, the likes of your Ryan Mazes and Eamon Fifes and Dougie Wilsons and Ross Redmonds and players like that, experienced Premiership campaigners, Gary Thompson as well. And last season, bringing those players in and winning the league was an absolute priority for them, and they went and done that. They battled their way to the title. They went into this season aiming to strengthen players like Ahu Obakam coming in and Josh Ukek. Fresh faces like them, Barra Salton top, Lewis McKinnon, you know, Aaron McCarry, Shane McCartan, you know, players that have come in with big pedigree, Irish League experience. I don't think they really should have went in with a weight of expectation as to a particular sort of league finish. And I think Niall Curry did well to set that out from the outset. He said the target was survival, and they've done that more than comfortably. Being in the conversation for a top six place at the end of their first season back is a success thing for any team in any season. And hats off to Niall Curry for the job that he's done ultimately. And the job's not done. They still have to go all in and get good results and try and finish in that seventh spot. So in the event that Dungannon win the league or win the Irish Cup, sorry, that seventh spot becomes a European playoff. And they have to go in and try and finish in there. But they've comfortably avoided relegation, which was priority number one. They've survived their first season in Premiership football. They've got the building blocks in place to stay in Premiership football, which is what I think a club of their history and their fan base demands. The size of the club. They're four-time Irish League champions in their history. They've got a big support, and that's things that demand you play Premiership football. So I think that's step number two, is that they began that process of establishing themselves again by staying up in their first season back. And if they clinch Europe or a European playoff, it's a brilliant season for Portadown. I think any Portadown fan would have bit their hand off for that at the start of the season. And now, if they can do that, or wherever they finish, or going into the summer, I'm sure Niall will already have his plans drafted for strengthening the squad in the summer and pushing on even more. So I think Portadown are in a good place at the moment, regardless of where they finish. But to finish seventh, and if they can make that a European playoff, I think would be an extraordinary first season back for them.
You have just maybe think about something there, just about the European playoffs. So it's not guaranteed that seventh will be a part of the playoffs in my head, or how does that all work?
Yeah, it would be Dungannon would have to win the Irish Cup, because obviously Cliftonville are bottom half. They could finish seventh and get it, but they would have to win the Irish Cup. And then obviously, Bangor and Ards as championship clubs, it would be second to sixth if they complete the mother of all upsets.
One thing there that you're talking about, the permutations of the Swifts winning the Irish Cup, they are in the top six, and that means that we have a change in that lineup for the first time in donkeys. That means someone has to miss out. The team that missed out was Cliftonville. That fate was sealed midweek when they couldn't overtake and beat Coleraine. They do then beat Carrick Rangers at home, so they're actually sitting in seventh. So Portadown slip all the way down to eighth. That's probably the lowest they've been in a number of months in the table. They're even on points, 46 points each, 3 away from Coleraine. Doesn't really matter what they get now, they'll not be able to jump above them. Ballymena, with 43, we'll talk about their result in a second. Like, Cliftonville, this has just been such a weird season. 13 wins is the same as Coleraine, but the difference is that 13 loss column at Portadown got pretty much the same thing. 13 wins, 7 draws, 13 losses. They haven't scored as many goals as they want to. Pretty leaky at the back as well at times. Cliftonville, just not the right results at the right time. They have lacked that bit of firepower. I think with the ascent towards winning the League Cup, ascent towards the Irish Cup, which could falter, let's be fair, that will somewhat soothe the burn of missing out on the top six. But how did Cliftonville now play this? That was the question that I was talking to people as I was heading home from a game on Saturday. What did Cliftonville do? Do they just sit back? Does it really matter to Cliftonville if they're 7th, 8th, or 9th? I'm sure they'll want to be in 7th just in case they need that European playoff spot. But how can they push on? Because do they really want a Johnny Addis leg break against Glenavon, when realistically does that matter, that game,
Yeah, it's been a strange old season for Cliftonville. I think finishing in the bottom half is a disappointment regardless. I think there's no way I think you can look at that any other way. Finishing in the bottom half for a club of Cliftonville's stature, it's underwhelming. Feels like a bit of a damp squib, maybe. Obviously, there's still 7th to potentially fight for, but it's as you say, with Dungannon getting into the top six, someone had to miss out, and I think Cliftonville have felt the effects of the loss in quality up top with Ronan Hale and Ben Wilson and Sam Ashford all leaving. I think it was always going to be a bit of a tall order for them to replace players of that caliber and that firepower. Ultimately, bottom half's a disappointment, but then you look at the flip side, they've won the League Cup and they're in the semi-finals of the Irish Cup, and many of their supporters are fancying them to go and repeat the feat. Yeah, how do you look at it? Well, winning the Irish Cup guarantees them another season of European football is definitely important because Cliftonville have become used to that. They're a club that's competed at the top table for a number of years, competing for leagues. Yes, they're seventh spot, but they want to keep it in their own hands. And to an extent, yes, it is in their own hands because they can go and win the Irish Cup. So I think they have to go and do that, but they can't really drop the ball in the league. They've still got to have a head of steam and push towards it. In terms of the squad, has been a little disrupted by injury, you have to say, got injured early on in the season, and he's such a metronomic influence for them in midfield. They missed him a bit.
I saw number 3 in a red shirt against Coleraine midweek, and I had to think and go, who is number 3 for Cliftonville? Why do I not know this? And then I realised it's Sean Stewart. How did I forget about him? But
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
another player who was a key part of them going forward.
Yeah, and Sean Stewart's had a lot of injury issues this season, and yes, you young players kicking on. Shay Kearney still had a good season. I've still been impressed when I've watched him. He's somebody that really catches the eye when he drives with it. And Alex Parsons, their new Australian hero. Maybe had he joined a wee bit earlier, that could have been enough because he looks an absolute player as well. The way he can run with the ball, he's unafraid to take players on. The League Cup final, I thought he was really impressive. He scored a couple of eye-catching goals since joining. Up top, Ryan Curran started to hit form again. He's another one that's had a hard time with injury. But he's got a couple of goals. Gormley, he's just inevitable. People saying he's finished. He's just evolving. He's still that predatory fox in the box that he always has been. Still scores goals. A couple others, as Axel Pearsall, very technically gifted player. He's been on Premier League benches at Luton Town, and he has that quality. So yes, there's still good players in the Cliftonville team, but if we come back to the players that they lost, for any manager in world football, that's an enormous challenge.
And a particular type of player they were as well. They had energy, they could run the channels, and that's just something that I don't think is really Curran's game. And they've tried to find players to fit that mold, but just hasn't come to the fore for them. I mean, if we're talking about Saturday's game against Carrick Rangers, it feels like them back to the usual selves. Cliftonville 3-0 at home. But the incident that everybody's waiting for us to talk about is the one featuring Jack McIntyre, the goalkeeper for Carrick Rangers. I mean, we can't talk about his intent or anything like that. We can just comment on what we see from some of the footage that's out there from different angles. What I'm talking about is while he went to grab a ball just in front of the main home stand at the end there at Solitude. He put his hand out and down went the ball boy. Lots of people felt as though perhaps we've seen interactions between goalkeepers and ball boys before. We've seen sometimes in an instance like that a red card being brandished. I think one thing we can say about this, it was ill-advised to in any way physically interact with the ball boy.
I think so. And I saw this morning there's a PSNI investigation in India going on, so probably can't really comment too much into the incident, but yeah, no red card was ultimately given. I saw Stephen Baxter and Jim Magilton were asked for their views on it, and neither said that they saw it. But yeah, it certainly has a rather unseemly look to it. Not exactly the best look, I suppose, if you want to go by how it's been talked about and the reactions in the crowd. It certainly had the look of a bit of an unseemly incident, and we'll await and see what the outcome of that is.
Returning to what this all means for the league, Carrick have 9 points on Loughgall. That's been shortened because Loughgall get their first victory in donkeys, beating Ballymena United at home. And maybe all that talk from me in August saying, you know what, this Benji McGee, yes, he's a great player, but Loughgall, they are not a one-man team because he gets the goal late to get a draw against the Crues away from home after coming on at the break, and what a goal he scored against Ballymena. 2-1 it was to Loughgall against the Sky Blues, but some people in Loughgall say, oh, he's still getting the fitness, he's training with Lauren during the day, but that goal he scored just shows everything that Benji McGee can be. It's why he had this big whopper of a price tag on him. Few players can just slalom their way through players and finish in the way he did. That's exactly what he did last season, and it's probably what Loughgall have, in fact, been lacking all year.
Yeah, you'd have to say so. First league win since November. Definitely, if they have any hope of clawing back a place and Lazarus mission and finishing in the relegation playoff, this will be a pretty good kick-starting point. You can see last season Benji McGee had the quality. As you say, Peter obviously earned him that big move to Larne. That strike force now, that was him and Nathaniel Ferris, and that's now obviously been broken up with Nathaniel Ferris now at Glentoran. But I do think if they really want to mount a push, and interestingly, I saw Sam Johnstone, who's standing in as Loughgall manager, has announced that permanent successor is expected to be announced this week. So it'll be interesting to see what comes to that. Certainly a player like Benji McGee is a player that you're going to rely on to score goals and inspire any sort of push to avoid automatic relegation. It's a win on the board. It's a much needed lift, you have to say, with the amount of time that Loughgall have went without a victory in the league, and coming into the split. Yes, it's unlikely, but they've closed the gap. They made a gain going into the final 5 games when teams are going to be taking points off each other. They'll need a few favours elsewhere, but a player of his quality and is someone you're going to expect to lead the charge, and now they've got a bit of belief behind them.
And the funny quirk of the split is that, I hope I've got this right, apologies if not, the way I read it is that Loughgall will play Ballymena and Clifton will play Carrick Rangers again in the first, not really weekend, it's a Tuesday night, but the first game week of the split. So they get to do it all over again, and if those results are repeated, it's game on, Mr. Bennett, because that would then make it 6 points between Loughgall and Carrick Rangers. It would be some great escape. I very much doubt it is on, especially because it's realistically not 9 points, it's 10 points because of the whopping goal difference that Carrick Rangers have over Loughgall. Loughgall are minus 42 goal difference, and Carrick are only minus 24. So that's a big difference there. Can't see it myself, but if you're Loughgall, fire it all together, game at a time. Let's see if they can win every game, and they might, because they have the one thing Loughgall I think I've always had is that because they've scored more than Carrick, and I'm not surprised by that. They do have a little bit of a spark. They don't have Ferris, but they have these players in Gibson, even from midfield. Andrade, now with Benji up there. They don't have Jay Boyd, but they kind of can get goals from around the different places. And if they can just have a bit of openness to their game, they could maybe catch some of these teams who, Glenavon, Ballymena, Portadown, Linfield, they may be napping. And because the big problem for Carrick Rangers is that they're struggling so much to score that I don't think it's going to happen. But this is a one moment where, for Loughgall, if you're asking me, but is there still a chance? Yes, Mr. Loughgall and Mrs. Loughgall, there is still technically a chance.
Well, they have hope. Certainly, had they been, 12 points behind, it would have been a foregone conclusion. Results going for them and them doing their job last week, they're going to go into these final 5 games with the belief that they can do it. They've got no distractions, nothing Irish Cup related. Their full focus is on the league, and if they want to mount a great escape, as I say, they'll need favours from elsewhere. They'll go in, and if they beat Ballymena, and as you say, Cliftonville beat Carrick again, then that makes it very interesting. It's down to 6 points, and needless to say, the two teams still have to play each other. And I think I'm right in saying they play each other at Loughgall. So
on the penultimate, so
it would be interesting, that one.
Saying that, you swap them around, Loughgall lose to Ballymena, Carrick beat Cliftonville, and it's all over. 12 points the difference, 4 games to go, and
Yeah,
yeah.
that's just it. That's the fine margins, and they will need favours. Loughgall could win and Carrick could win, and that would still leave them in a bit of a tricky spot. But I think as long as Loughgall have hope, and they've been given a bit of it by winning their last game of the split, I think they'll go in with at least the belief until it's not over to the fat lady sings. Yes, it's more hope than expectation, but I just think they have to go in with belief and score goals fundamentally. Try and keep it tight at the back because, the nature of some of the goals that they've conceded this season have been disappointing. A couple of mistakes at the back have cost them at times. They really have to go in. If they keep it tight at the back and they score a few goals, a la how they did against Ballymena, then they'll go in and believe they can do it.
Glenavon lose to Larne in the final game, I think, that we haven't talked about yet. Typical kind of end of season fare. It feels like it's Tiernan O'Connor who looks like a bright little pickup for Larne, has settled pretty well into football in the top division. His is the goal that seals it. There's goals that don't count for Glenavon, but after such a nice start to their time, early time for Paddy McLaughlin, recent results haven't been great, but in the end, the fact that they're not sweating about relegation with 5 games to go is one of the real achievements, and that they'll go into the next few games thinking, let's beat our rivals Portadown and put on a few good games with a team that they'll all want to improve for next term, so that they're not having this mountain to climb where they'll feel that's where they've been playing from behind pretty much most of the season.
Yeah, I think it's been a decent early impact from Paddy McLaughlin, all things considered, because start of the season, to be honest, I had them as a relegation favourite. I thought they would be possibly in a spot of bother, and ultimately they're in no sort of bother at the moment. So I think it is about seeing the season out. If they end the season strongly, again, that's a platform to build off. I really rate Paddy McLaughlin as a manager. I think his methods, he was the best option I think that Glenavon could have went for when he was appointed. His training regimes was 3 days a week that worked absolute wonders at Cliftonville. He's brought that into Glenavon. You could say there's a bit more fitness about them. Yes, they've had a few issues in terms of taking chances in front of goal and being more clinical at points, but I think they've shown general improvement across the board. And there's good players in that team that you want to keep a hold of. I saw they took the interesting step of saying that they'd offered Len O'Sullivan and David Toure, who I've been impressed by, offered them new contracts without them actually signing it. I don't blame them for wanting them to sign them. They've been two impressive performers. Barney McCune has been a leader for them at the back, and
of course, by the nature of, we're all very well aware of them more than maybe in previous years. This pre-contract situation in the Irish League, they can offer them contracts, but so can others if they follow the right methods and technicals that they need to do. But yeah, it's kind of an open market for their services now.
Yeah, it's an interesting discussion pre-contracts, and I think this season might have possibly changed the discourse around them because we've seen it with Coleraine. Jim Boyce had said, "Do you think about changing tack? You agree a pre-contract in January. Is there that sort of conflict of interest? If it comes to a crunch game?" He'd suggested at that point, I think it was 2 months before the end of the season, that you offer contracts rather than necessarily in the winter. But yes, the way it is now, it is effectively a free-for-all. If you go in and you're interested in a player that's on an expiring deal, and you go in and you offer them, the right terms, and we've seen it possibly with Coleraine, bringing that forward with Levi Ives and Ronan Doherty to sign them in the here and now rather than wait to the end of the season, which maybe went into the Cliftonville and Larne that their player had already agreed to move elsewhere. So stick or twist. And ultimately they decided to cash in early and get a transfer fee for their services. Needless to say, Glenavon have effectively there put it on the record that they want David Toure and Len O'Sullivan to stay. I'm sure there's very much others that they want to stay, but coming back to Glenavon, I think the aim for Paddy McLaughlin would have been to get them out of the relegation battle. They've done that. Looks like they're going to ultimately avoid any sort of relegation bother by a fair degree of comfort. Probably a bit too far away to be in contention for 7th place, but if they see out the season on a high, pick up a few positive results, and then assess their options in the summer, and they probably do need a bit more depth and freshening up top as a first priority, I think Glenavon have a means to go on.
Lewis, we couldn't have you on the podcast, or any time you're on the podcast, we always spend a bit of time chatting about the championship. That might change. How much will you be viewing the championship when you don't have your beloved Bangor in it? What a week for the Seasiders.
Yeah,
You get beat by the Welders 4-1, and you're starting to feel not particularly great. Is momentum with them? It's down to 5 points with 6 games to go. And then the Welders go and lose against the bottom place team at that point in the league. Bangor went out, and that 8 point gap is still there, looking pretty through the ringer.
well, Peter, I think if ever you need a display of the championship, I think that's just it. Beat the top team one week and lose to the bottom team the next. It's that close. Those fine margins. I have had people suggest to me that almost like it's a foregone conclusion that Bangor's going to go up, but I'm always quick to stress back to them, far from it. And certainly on Tuesday night, it's a disappointing defeat to the Welders. And the Welders fully deserved the win. The scoreline probably did reflect the performance as well. They came out with their tails up and put on a show, and ultimately probably their best performance of the season when they really needed it. And then the weekend, Bangors went over Dundela. It was a hard fought enough game, and Duns dug in defensively, frustrating in that a few chances were missed, but then really nice piece of play. Jack O'Mahony got the ball in midfield and a really good ball into the box, and Ben Arthurs, who's produced the goods time and time and time again, heads into the bottom corner. That was sort of just the release. It definitely does pop up. Newington took the lead early with Jay Donnelly scoring inside 3 minutes, and immediately there was just the glances to the phone. What's the Welders score? The players on the pitch were focused, and Ben Arthur's got that breakthrough and kind of just to the end of the game kind of saw it out. And Michael Morgan with a really nice finish that ultimately clinched the points in the end for Bangor, and then Jay Donnelly simultaneously got a second goal for Newington and ultimately win that one. And now you have it as well. It's Limavady are well in a shout of the playoff as well, because they're now level on points with the Welders, and Anna got a couple of positive results as well in the past number of weeks, or I think they're only 4 points outside as well. So it's properly bunched up, but 8 points going into the split. From a Bangor supporter's point of view, would I have taken that at the very start of the season? Absolutely.
You talk about Anna, they've won their last 3 games, 4 points away from second and third. Only one of those teams will finish second. Maybe it'll be Bangor, probably won't be, and we'll get that playoff game against what's looking likely to be Carrick Rangers. It'll be one of Carrick or Loughgall. And the thing about Anna is they've done this before. Didn't they do this last year where they were outsiders and then won their last 5-6 games, and then if it wasn't for a draw against Bangor in their final game, could have still sneaked in the second. That must have been a night where, from a Bangor point of view, you thought, oh, you've missed out on the title and you've missed out on second, and you've got another whole big season to go. Newry's dropping out. You never know, another team, Ballymena, could have fallen through down into the division, and you get so close, but you're just never sure. Can you do it all over again? You've relatively steamrolled this season. The Irish Cup semi-final and potentially more would be a highlight for many teams at the level of Bangor, even some teams who are seasoned top flight teams. This must feel like one of the greatest seasons in the club's recent history, probably this side of the year 2000, if that's a marker that I'm constantly looking to. You're almost there, and it's just about holding your nerve. But that's easy to say from an outsider's point of view, because every game you'll play against, it'll either be Dundela, Ards, Anna, Limavady, Welders. These are all, which is the nature of the split, the toughest games you could face. And especially with Anna, Limavady and the Welders, they are going to be so hungry, and it'll be all out attack. So as much as you want to avoid defeat, you'll not want to go out and maybe leave yourself open in the back. But if you stand off, you get picked off quite easily.
Yeah, well, Anna, they did it last season, Peter. As you said, they crept in unsighted. Probably should have expected it because they were in the promotion playoff in the two previous seasons, and ultimately the same as Bangor, they were so near yet so far. Again, they're very much in with a shout, and teams will take points off each other. Hopefully, it's a battle for second place. It doesn't involve Bangor, but tied at the top, and it's the same fine margins that we've become accustomed to. The Welders have been impressive this season. They've got Michael McClellan back at their disposal, who's likely to run away with championship top goal scorer this year. Limavady have had a really strong season back the championship after their promotion as champions of the BIL last year. I think the squad that they had, I'm not surprised to see them in the position that they're in. They've got a really well assembled squad. Paul Owens is the manager who plays a good brand of football. They've got a lot of quality, particularly with the former Coleraine stalwarts, the likes of your Stevie Lowrys and such like. And Anna, who are seasoned at challenging for promotion, they've just not quite crossed over that line. They're very much in with a shout of the playoff, and I don't think they should be written off by any means. So the split it'll be certainly tough. It's a test of resilience. It's like you could talk about sports in America. It's like, going into the playoffs. It's a different environment of the regular season, and any team is capable of taking points off any team. Ultimately, every game is going to have consequence. So certainly it's going to be very exciting. Even at the bottom, Spring and Newington step, because they're now off the bottom. They're into the relegation playoff place. Newry are down to the bottom. Ballymallard and Ballyclare aren't completely out of the woods. So it's a lot of permutations still to be decided. One bad result for one team can make an absolute world of difference come the end of the year.
Just for those who haven't been totally following the championship, we'll slip down to Section B for a moment, as you were talking about Newington there. Of course, Jay Donnelly was the huge big January signing for them, and you thought if he could get fit, he could be a massive player in their push to avoid bottom. I think many people have probably expected Newry to struggle in the league, not to this extent. They are now officially bottom going into the split. Newington have one more game on them. There's one more game they play before the split. That'll be between Newington and Dundela. There's 1 point difference between Newington and Newry. That could be expanded to 4, which would be really, really bad news for Newry. You say they're about Ballyclare 35, Ballymallard 37. Not technically out of it, but feels out of it. Institute fall away from being second last year. They particularly struggled early on in the season. They finished 7th. And out of the top 6, at least pre-split, with 41 points. Newry had turned things around ever so slightly in recent weeks. In the past 3 games before their loss on Saturday, there was a win and 2 draws. Newington have got 2 wins in the last 3. The massive game will be between Newington and Newry. That game, the penultimate game in the league. You never know, either team could go on a run. But when people go, what on earth went wrong at Newry? Unfortunately for them, they started the season very, very poorly. It took a while for them to try and change things up. There was a lot of changes that when finally Darren Mullen came back in as boss that he made, and it took a while for them to really settle in. And they have goal scorers. I really like McNichol. Healy's back in the team. But they've continued on their form from last year. Leaky defence. 66 goals conceded. Not the worst in the league, but still, that's a big part of why they're there. Do you worry for Newry?
Yeah, well, they definitely need results. I think that's stating the obvious. Yeah, I would agree with your assessment on Ryan McNichol. He's a player that's impressed me. He's got a turn of pace. He can get in behind the defence, and his goals have really kept them in the fight from that point of view. They're a young squad.
But most importantly, he's a big lump.
Yeah.
And Irish League fans love a big lump of a striker.
But even in other areas of the pitch, midfield, they've got a lot of youth. It's energetic. And to be fair, I went down and watched Bangor against Newry, and Newry beat us. And the key in that game was the midfield. They just swarmed, in terms of the pressure that they applied. They are capable of really compressing space. and making life difficult. As the results would say, the fans would want it to be a little bit more consistent. They'll certainly not go down without a fight, I don't think. Newington, I think I think Jay Donnelly's 7 goals in 7 games now. He's made a big difference because I don't think they were as poor a team as maybe their league position suggests. Maybe they just needed that little bit of cutting edge. And a player of Jay Donnelly's caliber who's played in Europe, used to being at the top end of the Irish League in the past number of years, now playing for Newington. He's come in and give them a fresh injection. So they're really in the fight. It will be a tight battle, maybe by default. Newry, considering they were playing Premiership football last season, I think many people would probably automatically install them as the favourites over Newington on that basis. But the split's just that unpredictable that, one result turns everything. And Newry do have that quality. You mentioned Brian Healy as well, really impressed with him at Ballyclare, where he was on loan. McNichol, who's got that quality, I think they signed him from Distillery, and he scored the goals that have kept them in the fight all over the pitch. They're going to rely on a bit of youthful determination, and maybe they're more experienced campaigners. They've got guys like Noel Healy, even, who's been there a long time. Players that have really been there and done it. Lorcan Ford as well, he's got a cracking goal in him. I think he's had a bit of an issue with red cards this season, but when he's fit and ready and available, he's someone that can make a difference. So if they have that mesh of the experienced players that they had last season in the Premiership, combined with a bit of the energy of the youth, that's going to hold the key for them. And, rest assured, Darren Mullen's not going to let them go down without a fight.
I do think Newry should have the players to get them out of that. We don't know what the Newington result with Dundela is. That could be a huge impact. Hard to count them out. You know where I'm going to go with this, because a bit like the top flight, there is the promotion relegation playoff. And if we do step down to the PIL, Dollingstown is sitting atop the league with 44 points. But there's Warrenpoint also on 44 points, sitting on second, a game in hand over Dollingstown. But Dollingstown have a better goal difference. The Mourne ultimatum could be a promotion relegation playoff. Oh my.
Jeez, yeah. And we said that a couple of years ago, that it was potentially on the cards when, Warrenpoint had finished second and Newry had only just avoided relegation from the Premiership. Obviously, the circumstances happened that saw Warrenpoint drop down to the PIL, but they've been fighting at the top end of the league all season this year and really have their sights on returning back into senior football, which is, I think from their point of view and what they're used to, it's where they'll say they belong. But the PIL is a hard league, and you really need to fight because Dollingstown have had a really good run of form as well. Throughout the past number of weeks, and it's going into the run-in, and the way the league is, you've got a lot of fixtures that come up at sort of the back end, majority of the fixtures, so it really does have that sense of a sprint to the finish line. Warrenpoint, are the team that I think will have that sort of expectation on them to get into the championship. Dollingstown, I'm not sure when Dollingstown were last in the championship. It's a good fight, and Warrenpoint was, with a well-built team, they've invested a lot in their youth ever since they went down to the PIL, but they still got experienced campaigners, the likes of John Boyle, the captain. He's someone that's been on both sides of the ultimatum. He's been around years, a real leader at the back, somebody who can really, he's a good influence on young players, and that, he can really tear one out of you, but you're better alongside him playing. But they have invested in youth, a couple of impressive players, Michael Letty at Warrenpoint, and Dollingstown, who've had a consistent management team and have good players in their ranks and who can battle as well. So it will be an interesting fight. And then you've got teams like Rathfriland in there who've invested a lot in their squad, and I thought a couple of weeks ago, I think that we had a wee bit of a stumbling block there, but a couple of weeks ago I would have had them as a team that could sort of fight for the playoff as well. The likes of, Jake Corbett's a player that's played in Premiership football. Stephen McCabot's a striker that always impressed me at Banbridge. Anytime I saw him, and I saw him, play for Rathfriland, and he was bustling, making runs, and causing problems. There's a game against Ballymacash that he scored in. So, um, they've got quality there. Rory Fitzpatrick is another player with real dancing feet. So I think Rathfriland are probably looking from the outside in, probably an outside shout at this rate. It does look like it could be a two-horse race between Warrenpoint and Dollingstown as the business end comes in. But certainly if you're a Newington or a Newry, you can't take it as a given. Whichever one of those teams gets the playoff, that necessarily you're going to beat them, because you know, Warrenpoint have experience at the top level in senior football, and they know the demands of the level. And then Gary Boyle, they've got a manager that's managed Premiership football. Okay, maybe his stint at Newry wasn't the best, and he had a tough act following up on Darren Mullen, but he's had a really good season in charge of Warrenpoint, and it's certainly going to be a tough battle going into the final few games there.
Let's return up to the Section A then of the championship, and we'll leave it with this. Bangor looking strong favourites, pretty much need about a win, 2 wins will secure it for them, won't it? If one win pretty much does it. With the Welders Limavady, both, 2 goals, the goal difference between them, both on 60 points. That's a straight shootout between them. For the Anna, if they beat Limavady, beat the Welders, and then hope those 2 teams draw, those games don't happen in that order, but that would have them popped above them by a point. So that's what they're going to have all their fingers crossed. Who's your favourite amongst all them? People really think it's going to be the Welders. I thought for a long time it was just going to be Limavady just because of their experience. If you were to back either one of those teams to get it, who would it be? And who would you say would be the more likely to sneak past Carrick, if it is Carrick, and why?
That's a tough question. That's a really tough question, because you kind of said it yourself, there's 2 goals in them, in terms of the goal difference. It is really, really tight. I was impressed by Limavady and the PIL principles of football that Paul Owens plays, and his connections at Coleraine and the players that he's managed to bring in. They do have real quality. That came to the fore as well. Feel like it's almost been forgotten that they beat Larne in the Irish Cup. They've got blends of youth and experience, and Stevie Lowry, who is still a class act at his age, at 38, 39 years old, he's still able to control a midfield. You've got, other players in there that can make a difference, like Michael McCrudden, and again, another player proven in Premiership football. They do have seasoned professionals in their ranks, and they also have good young players. So it's a very well blended squad. And you look at the Welders, Tyrone O'Connor leaving was obviously a blow, because yes, it kind of only felt like a matter of time before someone was going to snap him up from the top flight, but he was still a player that took a big leap this year in terms of consistency and doing, scoring goals consistently, that burst of pace. And the Welders do have a young, exuberant team on the whole. Davy Parkhouse is a player that feels like he's been around longer than he has. He's 24, 25 years old, and he's still got an absolute rocket of a finish. Michael McClellan's the top scorer in the league. He's a battle hardened, championship is his league. If you look at statistics over the past number of years, you find it hard to pick out a season where he's not been among the top scorers in it. So they do have seasoned professionals. They also have young players. Josh Key, the manager's son, who has already signed his deal with Larne. He's back on loan until the end of the season. He's energetic. He's a set piece threat. He's got a wee bit of everything about him. Defensively, they've got experienced players like Lewis Patterson. Thoroughly impressed me. Craig Harris, who's experienced at that level. Oren O'Kane's another young player who's impressed. Dalen Farron's another player with a burst of speed. They've got energy, and if they're playing a team like Carrick, I do think they have the tools to unsettle them. Who I think would be closer to sneak it, they do make the playoff again. It's on a knife edge. If you're looking at the team's strengths, Limavady are a ball-playing team. Try and get the ball on the ground. They can also hit teams on the counter. They've got pace going up that way. Have kind of caught attention because they play a high line. They press aggressively. They really do apply it from the front. They take risks. I think if you're going into a playoff between the Welders and Carrick, if the Welders go in and score the first goal, that can turn it for them. Seriously, I think they can go in, and if they score the first goal, they can really start to turn the screw. Limavady, maybe, as a newcomer to the division this season, would you look at it as maybe, another season or two would do them good if they keep that core group of players, invest in the summer? Time will tell, because as you said, the championship's full of surprises. They might not get another shot next season. So out of one of the two, I would literally by a hair's breadth lean towards the Welders. Maybe just because they're a wee bit more seasoned to the division, because I think they have players and profile of players that can hurt a team like Carrick. But it really, really is so hard to call.
Well, with some teams feeling the wind down on their season, for teams like Bangor, it feels like it's just about to hit the apex of it this weekend. Irish Cup semi-finals, all those games still ahead for Bangor to secure an incredible promotion, return to the top flight in Northern Irish football for the first time since the original 12-team league was formed. So that's over 15 years ago, wouldn't it be now? So it would be amazing. Bangor pulling huge crowds. Maybe Limavady fans and Welders fans will say, no, thank you very much. But let's talk about your big weekend ahead. There's two face-offs between North Down Championship opposition and top flight teams. We'll start the Friday, shall we? Ards against Cliftonville. It's don't blink here, Ards, because Cliftonville, are doing well here. But how many teams have Ards already kicked out that are from the top flight?
Yeah, Ards have beaten Loughgall and Ballymena on their way to it already. So they've claimed a couple of scalps, and Cliftonville certainly shouldn't take them lightly. Cliftonville obviously go in as favourites by virtue of being the top flight team, the holders of the competition, and they will, have that sort of expectation on themselves to go and win the game. Ards seem to have turned it up for the Cups this season, and bearing in mind that I think I'm right in saying that Ards took Cliftonville to a penalty shootout in the County Antrim Shield already this season, so could play into it. Ards obviously knocked out Crusaders last season, so they perform well against Premiership teams generally. I think Cliftonville should have enough. I think they'll have enough, but I look at Ards players, that can cause a threat. Aidan Steele in midfield has been in really good form for them. Scored big goals for them. I've got leaders in the team, the likes of your Michael Rudleys and players like that who've got experience. Eamon Skinnell as well. They've got that pedigree across the board.
Darius Ruhi is a former Red himself, albeit he didn't have much of a time in the first team. But moving on from Ballyclare to Ards, that'll be a stage for him where he'll want to show his pedigree and his potential.
Yeah, and they've got two good strikers there, Ards, and Darius Ruhi and Lee Newell, and players that can bounce off each other. So they've got, John Bailey's a few different ways that he can go about it. I think the key to them is to be defensively organised, first and foremost, because although Cliftonville have lost a bit of firepower, they've still got players like Alex Parsons and Ryan Curran and Joe Gormley that can penetrate backlines. And Ards also need to be clinical going up the other way. So there's not much margin for error for them, but we've seen this season that they've claimed a few scalps already. That's momentum for them to go off. They've got a good run of form in the league now. I think that's 3 wins on the bounce. So, they'll go in with confidence. They'll have a big crowd. Ards turns up for cup finals, or cup semi-finals and cup finals. So they'll have a big support in the stands. They'll be motivated to go out and put in a performance.
They took out Crusaders last year, beat Ards, beat Ballymena in the cup this year, also slipped by Loughgall, but this feels like a rather significant task ahead of them. It would be one of the bigger shocks in the cup this year if they were to get past the Reds, even if this isn't the same Cliftonville team with the same teeth that they would have in previous years.
it's as we touched on earlier with Cliftonville. Do they sort of put their focus in the league, or do they really home in on the cups? Um, and I think they need to have that ideal blend. They want to build momentum, and going into this game, they have done because they won at the weekend. But I think they will be really focused on doing a job in the cups. They've already got one, and they've got the taste for more. So, Jim and Gilton will have them organised. Maybe there's a bit of a bounce because of the talk of potential outside investment as well at Cliftonville. Suspect that. Can't really comment too much on it, but maybe a bottom half finish amid these talks has kind of spurred their desire a little bit, that maybe it is an option that they have to explore if they they want to push on in the league going into coming seasons. But that's a debate for another day. But going into this Irish Cup semi-final, they've got players that have performed in cups. They've won two cups in the last year, and they've got players that are experienced in winning cups. So they'll need to draw on some of that streetwiseness, if you can call it that, draw on the quality, because yes, they've lost a bit of it, but players like Rory Hale, you still expect players like that, like him to step up to the plate. Joe Gormley's a player that comes up at key moments with goals. So if they can take control of the moments in the game, then I think that'll be the key to it, because Ards will have their moments as well, and it's whoever's more clinical in them.
And then over to the Saturday game between Dungannon Swifts and Bangor. The huge loss that will be felt for Bangor is that you're going to be without PSG, and that's what a sighting he's been for you since the turn of the year, and you're going to have to be without him because you're playing against his parent club.
Yeah, that's correct. Unfortunately, yes, Patrick Solis-Scrogan's been really good. Came in late in the January transfer window, and probably barring the Welders game, when he'd be frustrated looking back at a few of the goals that he conceded. Every other game, he's been excellent. He's kept, I think that's 6 clean sheets in 9 games. So he's come in and made an immediate impact, and having a strong goalkeeper between your sticks is important. But then we've got capable understudies. James Taylor's on the bench, and he was obviously instrumental behind the campaign that won the PIL, and actually set the club's clean sheet record that year. So he'll be more than likely deputising in the game, and who knows, he can come in and make it and get a big performance, because it's not going to come down to one player. And on the topic of players that are unavailable, we'll have two key midfielders unavailable with Tiernan Mulvena and Robbie Garrett, who are both suspended. The bias in me says that yellow cards should be reset after the quarterfinals, but they're out of it, unfortunately, due to accumulation of yellows. So bit of a workaround in midfield as well. But I just said to you before that, beating Glentoran, I think we've got a very talented squad, probably the most talented squad that we've had in possibly a few decades. But it's a squad effort, and the players all work hard for each other. And whoever comes in, whatever the starting lineup, hopefully take the game to Dungannon, who are obviously going to be favourites for the game, and again to their top flight status and the impressive season that they've had.
I think they will be big favourites in there, and that's before we know the result of the game against Linfield. They look fresh, full of energy. Most teams have struggled to deal with their play, emerging from deep, tight at the back. And look, you list the players there who Bangor are missing, and that makes it even more harder for that side to overcome this. But that's what the Cup's all about. Both these teams you have the game plan, don't you, from how you played against Glentoran? It won't be exactly the same based on the side that you'll be facing, but it's keeping it tight early, see if you can find yourself into the game, get that goal, and then limit your mistakes, try and play mistake-free football, and from there make them beat you. Playing at a neutral ground will even that playing field out ever so much. Yes, you would love to have this being played in your own patch down at Clandyboy, but the fact that you're not having to go down to Stangmore Park probably helps just as much. Predictions across the board. I mean, I'm struggling to see past the Premiership teams here. I think, in fact, I would probably, just because the players you've said there, I would, in teams I think are more likely to get through, I think maybe Dungannon is the most likely out of all four, just because of those things. But tell me about what the feel in the town is like. I'm sure everybody's been talking about this, and it's going to be a big crowd coming out to see what is the biggest game in for Bangor in decades.
Oh, definitely. The allocation's already sold out. 1,500 allocation for at CV already. Yesterday the last ticket was sold for it. So yesterday being Sunday. But yeah, so there's definitely an appetite for it. Past games at Seaview, I look at the Steel and Sons Cup final from a couple of years ago. If there's a big backing, and it'll be from all corners of the ground, Bangor and Dungannon, you never know what's going to happen. Cup games have a different feel to them, and you always have to go in believing that you can win the game. And the cup's kind of isolated from that, isolated from the bread and butter. So you go in with belief, and Dungannon are a very good football team. They've got a very good manager. You look at the players that they have at their disposal. We're seriously talking about that they're going to be going in with a player like Gael Bagheera-Mana, who 10, 11, 12 years ago was starting at Old Trafford for Newcastle in Premier League games. It is mental to think about. And other players in there, the likes of John McGovern and Andy Mitchell and Keelan Dillon, Dean Curry, players that have a lot of experience between them, some of them older than others, but in terms of what they have and threats all across the pitch, score a lot of goals from range, set pieces. They're a threat in a lot of ways, and defensively, I think they're more organised than maybe they were prior to Rodney Macquarie's arrival. So they'll be tough, absolutely no question, and they'll be up for it. At the same time, I think it's also the first time Bangor and Dungannon Swiss have ever played each other in the Irish Cup, so maybe there is that element of the unknown. We'll see how it goes on the day.
Excellent. Lewis, I appreciate you giving us even more insight than some others, going from the top flight to the championship to these Irish Cup semi-finals. Intriguing fixtures await, but for those who want a bit more Lewis Bennett in their lives, more than just the odd podcast with me, how can they get it 24/7 on a weekly basis?
Just follow me on Bennett Lewis 75 on Twitter, X, however you call it. Find me there.
Excellent. As well as your writing offerings for various outlets.
Yes. So you can check out Football Chatters. Obviously, there's good Irish League reads on there. That's just footballchatters.co.uk.
Excellent, Lewis. It's been great to have you on. Good luck to your fine men in yellow over the coming weeks. We will be chatting about it one way or the other on this podcast as we ascend towards the final few weeks of this season. All the best, and I'll chat to you soon. The season may be coming to a close, but that doesn't mean you can't keep up with all the latest kick and match happenings, because if you want to know what's going on in the league, hopefully I'm there giving an insight, thought, feeling or opinion via all my social media pages. It's Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. It's kick and match on all of them. Highly recommend you to go on the one that people seemingly still or currently call X. That's the one where most of the crack and chat happens. You can of course follow this podcast on whatever your podcast player may be. If you go to the main page that has all the episodes on it, you'll be able to hit subscribe, follow, and some maybe has the wee bell thing where it gives you a notification as soon as a podcast is up. Guys, it's been a mad week, and I wouldn't be here without yourselves listening, sharing and talking about the show. So thank you. I feel very honoured, I feel very humbled, I feel very privileged. I'll chat very soon.